Most of us use the Psalms and Proverbs regularly in our devotional time. This type of literature is written poetically rather than in prose, and so at times it can be hard to understand. Is it okay to just apply it literally? Are the Proverbs promises from God or just helpful tips? And what about those Psalms where David is praying not so nice things about his enemies? What do you do with these awkward prayers?
Welcome to our Leadership Matters Series, The Written Word. In this series, we are going to discuss some of the principles that are helpful in better understanding and applying the truth of the Bible in our lives. Just click the link in the description box to download our free resources or the complete workbook. You can also access any of our other podcasts by going to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters.
Now in this episode, we'll look at our final genre of Scripture, the Psalms and wisdom literature. What are some of the unique principles in interpreting this type of literature? Since it is written in poetry form, it does not seem as straightforward as passages written in prose. And as we've seen with other biblical genre, poetry is filled with figurative language, and so also we have to use some of the principles we've learned in order to understand the meaning of non-literal language. If you have not done so yet, it might be helpful to review some of those episodes. Hebrew poetry differs from other poetry in that it does not typically rhyme or follow a rhythm pattern, as with English and other modern languages. This is particularly true of the original Hebrew. Translating poetry across languages, even today, means that it often has to make another form, which may result in it looking much like prose. Hebrew poetry main characteristic is parallel thoughts between lines or paragraphs rather than meter or rhyming. This is actually helpful in the translation into English and other languages as translators are able to reconstruct the structure, something not possible if the literary structure was centered around rhyming and rhythm. Since the New Testament writers were molded by Hebrew thought, we see the same kind of parallelism in the New Testament, even though it is written in Greek, which has a very different form and structure. And though we may have lost most of it, nearly half of all the Old Testament was in Hebrew poetic form. See, in the Proverbs we see synonymous parallelism, where an idea is expressed as a second or a third time. There's synthetic parallelism, where the poet adds to the original concept, as we see in Psalm 1. Then there's antithetical parallelism, which describes a structure where one idea is contrasted with another. Sometimes these three literary devices are even used in the same passage. So let's first look at the Psalms, the Jewish prayer book. There are actually 5 books included: Psalms 1 to 41, 42 to 72, 73 to 89, 90 to 106, and 107 to 150. See, it was the prayer book of Israel, an expression of prayer for a nation. There were many types of prayers expressed, every emotion and stage of life, likely why these prayers have stood the test of time. While there are many types of psalms ranging from the lament, Psalm 3, "How long, O Lord?" or, "Save me." There's the thanksgiving in Psalm 66, "See what the Lord has done." There's praise hymns in Psalms 146 to 150. There's "Praise ye the Lord." And there's salvation history in Psalm 78, "Tell of his wonderful acts." And celebration affirmation, like in Psalm 2, "I have installed my king." And then there's wisdom psalms. An example in Psalm 36, "The upright and the fool" talks about. And songs of trust, like the classic Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." See, poems originate as complete units of thought, so they should be interpreted in their entirety. As with poetry today, pulling words or phrases out of context can radically change the meaning and intent of the author. Each psalm serves as its own literary context because they originate as independent pieces of literature. In Israel's case, most of the time the use of a psalm reflects its historical background, as with a liturgy, a wedding song, or a funeral service. Now there are exceptions, as with those psalms which have superscriptions which relates to a particular Old Testament event. For example, in Psalm 3, above the chapter, it'll say the Psalm of David, where he fled from his son Absalom. So it is important to distinguish between community expressions and individual expressions, as this will help determine the application. Another example would be royal psalms, which apply typology to the kingly role that the New Testament gives Jesus. Christ is the new king, David, who fulfills the promises of kingship. Now, let me make a few thoughts on the imprecatory psalms. These are the ones that seem rather angry, even vengeful. While emotions are not sin, and the beauty of the Psalms is that they help us express every emotion, when does this cross the line to sin? See, instead of denying our negative thoughts of others, David displays a healthy way of expressing them. They are to be directed to God, not to the person who has offended or hurt us. This can help us fulfill the New Testament teaching to not sin in our anger and not returning evil for evil. Often hyperbolic language is used to release his anger as he directs his frustrations to God. While the psalmist expresses anger, he does not act on his anger. Directing his emotion to God is what keeps him from sinning in his anger. Finally, when David uses the word hate, we have to understand that the Hebrew literary and cultural context does not contradict Jesus' teaching that we should not hate. If this was the case, God would be sinning when he said in Malachi, Esau have I hated. See, in the original Hebrew, it can mean despise, but can also mean unwilling or unable to put up with or reject. So the language and intent in no way violates Jesus' teaching in Matthew 5. So how do we apply the Psalms today? First, the Psalms teach us to pray in every phase of life. The full range of human emotion is expressed in these prayers. I think whether we are experiencing times of joy and renewal, times of dryness, times of grieving, or times of anger, the Psalms are there to lead us and teach us to come before God with our whole being. The Psalms are also unique in the sense that they are the only book in which every word is directed to God. Of course, we need to use the principles we learn from figurative language, but the Psalms can teach and lead us in our prayers and personal relationships with God. How does seeing the imprecatory Psalms as David's expression of his emotions, yet without sinning, impact your reading of these Psalms as well as your own prayer life?
For this series, we are providing some free resources, which include a Bible study worksheet, 2 different Bible reading plans, as well as a chart describing the various genre of Scripture. To download these, click the links in the description box below. You can also view any of Phil's other podcast series at icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters. These include Mentoring Intelligence, Finishing the Race, Multicultural Teams, and the Fivefold Ministry. If you are interested in a more comprehensive leadership training program, check out our Christian Leadership Institute at mcnetcli.org. This is a unique online competency-based ministerial training based on a mentoring relationship. For other leadership resources, please visit our library at icmcanada.org/resources.
Okay, as we wrap up this episode, let's look at the wisdom literature. There are four books that are typically considered part of the wisdom literature genre. It's Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Job, and the Song of Solomon. Wisdom literature is a broad category in which a typically older person or elder relates wisdom to someone younger. It may use parables, make observations regarding life, or appeal to human experience. Sometimes they are short, pithy statements of moral truth, and as with all Hebrew poetry, frequently they use parallelism combined with the use of metaphors and similes. See, this genre is often misread as we tend to only pick parts of the text, or we misunderstand wisdom terms, categories, or the styles. We can also fail to follow the line of argument of the text. Wisdom in biblical literature is not about increasing our IQ or making intellectual arguments. It is rather about turning the reader's orientation to God. As we see in the book of Ecclesiastes and Job, they often contain incorrect advice and even a cynical view of life. So wisdom sayings express general truths, but they're not necessarily explaining them. The Proverbs do not supply arguments. They assume that the reader will see the point. The Proverbs have universal appeal rather than just particular appeal. See, the term Israel does not appear indicating that their relevance is for all people, but it is important to read them as a whole and not just lift segments out of the literary context. As I've noted, The sayings of the Proverbs touch on a wide range of human experiences and relationships. It is important to realize that the Proverbs are generalizations. They express the normal course of events. They are not to be viewed as divine promises or legal guarantees from God. In the normal course of life, for instance, training up a child in the way he should go will mean that they will not depart from it when they're older. But, and this is a big but, this proverb is not offering an ironclad promise or contract that this will always be the case. Proverbs don't deal with the special events of life or the exceptions, but rather with how things usually work out in human experience. They are designed to be memorable, not theoretically accurate. We have to read the Proverbs in light of this particular genre and not read them as we would an epistle from Paul in the New Testament. See, the ultimate value of wisdom literature is that it addresses day-to-day spirituality. So when it comes to some principles of interpretation, it's important to read the Hebrew proverb as generalizations or probabilities, not absolutes. We also need to read them in light of other scriptural truth. This is not to take away from the fact that they are God's authoritative word for our instruction. Proverbs such as 22 to 23, referring to our relationship with the poor, are straightforward and demand obedience. They're not just tentative suggestions. Others, like Proverbs 24, 30 to 34, refer to the sluggard or lazy person and provide insights that support a moral that is the writer's main point. The application flows from this concluding moral. The Proverbs are not designed to support selfish behavior, but instead provide guidelines, often using exaggerated poetic language. How does reading the Proverbs in this way help you better understand their purpose and how to apply them? Now, when it comes to the books like Ecclesiastes or Job, we have to also be aware that even though these books are authoritative for our life, not all statements contained in the text are true or sound true. What I mean is that much of Ecclesiastes provides a rather cynical wisdom. See, the author is making the point that life is meaningless if there is no God and He is not involved in our lives. It is, in its Hebraic form, it is showing what life looks like from a deistic point of view. Many parts of the book of Job also seem to provide inaccurate advice to prove a point. It is only at the end of the book that true clarity is reached. Okay, we've already come to the end of our series on how to better read and understand the written word, our Bibles. We have discussed some general interpretive principles as well as some specific ones for various genres of literature that we see in the Bible. Next time, though, I want to wrap up our series with some important concluding thoughts, so I hope you'll be able to join me then.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters and subscribing and sharing us. If you would like any of the resources or your own copy of this study, just click on the link in the description box. For any of our other leadership resources, check out our website, icmcanada.org/resources.